Hi, everyone. I am Catherine Ayers-Wickenhauser, Director of Communications at Direct Trust. And today I'm so excited to bring you a conversation with Lee Barrett from ENAC and Scott Stewie from Direct Trust. Lee is the President and CEO of ENAC. Lee, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Catherine.
And Scott, hi. Scott, you are the President and CEO of Direct Trust.
Exactly right. Thanks so much. This is a great opportunity.
Sure. And knowing that there's been a partnership among the two organizations for a while, but Direct Trust focuses on trust and identity, and ENAC focuses on overall data privacy and security. Could you two describe the relationship and your partnership? And Lee, maybe we can start with you to provide us some background information.
Sure. And you know, we have some great background, I think, between our two organizations. This actually started probably, I'm going to say 8 years ago, when all the work that was going on with the Office of the National Coordinator, ONC at that time. David Kibbe was very involved, along with many others from the Direct Trust, which what became the Direct Trust community, were involved in the development of this standard for direct. And at that point, David and I had talked for a lot, we had significant conversations about, hey, how can we look to create an accreditation program with the whole aspect here of focusing on trust, especially around privacy security for the HISPs, the CAs, and RAs. So we started putting together between both of our organizations really great teams. There was a team that was put together for Direct Trust. We had a team as well. We worked collaboratively to develop a whole set of criteria for these accreditation programs. And we launched it together, and it was widely popular and accepted by the community in really raising the bar, Catherine. So we evolved that, you know, we were doing the administration of those programs. We had our assessors were going through and assessing the HISPs, the CAs, and RAs. It was a fantastic, and it was and is a fantastic partnership. When Scott became, you know, as David then retired and Scott came in, Scott and I continued to have a very strong relationship and partnership as well, as we continued to look at, okay, how can we look from a member perspective, because the member organization there continued to evolve with more services and capabilities that Scott was bringing in and that the Direct Trust community was doing. So he and I continued to focus on, as they were looking at these accreditation programs, how they can continue to evolve. And they did, and Scott and team evolved them to the point that we're now providing the privacy and security aspects for those programs, which is terrific. But also, I think we expanded it as well to look at you know, what the members need, and so providing things like consultative services for helping organizations as far as their pre-assessments, if they want to go for an ENAC or high trust, because we expanded this to include for privacy and security both ENAC and high trust. And then lastly, things like, you know, how can we look to as well focus on the whole trust aspect for the industry? And both Scott, from a Direct Trust perspective, and ENAC have worked towards the whole interoperability side of this. And so we continue to kind of evolve our relationship and partnership, especially in providing kind of additional value add to the members from the Direct Trust community.
Surely, thank you. And Scott, any additional background information to add?
No, I think Lee's done a good job of describing the situation. We have collaborated over this long period of time to create you know, a set of assessments for our membership. And really the goal here is to expand the sense of confidence people have about exchanging healthcare information. It is the privacy and security angle of this is a moving target. The threat level is constantly shifting. And so for Direct Trust in particular, it was important to have a partner that could handle that part of the picture. And we could then focus more on the kinds of things that were exclusive to what it meant to be a health information service provider or what it meant to be a certificate authority in our community, and to really specialize in those areas for our accreditation programs, where that when it came to privacy and security, we really wanted to make sure that that there was an organization that was constantly staying abreast of the changing threat environment, and that's a big piece of work that is frankly well beyond the scope of what direct trust inside of our realm could do. And so it's terrific to have a partner that's frankly handling that piece and also offering these other programs that are related to that privacy and security piece that some of our members will also have interest in. So ENAC ends up being a very important part of our relationship and or part of our community's expectations. Basically, our community needs independent certification so that they can be very comfortable with exchanging with each other. And that's the key element here, is creating the necessary trust by independently certifying. People are doing the best job they can, but who says they're doing a good job? Well, in this case, ENAC says they're doing a good job relative to privacy and security, and relative to other aspects, those are direct trust putting their stamp on that effort.
Sure. And Scott, I'm curious. So you were just mentioning the privacy and security program, and I'm interested how it's evolved over the years and throughout the partnership between ENAC and Direct Trust. Can you describe that evolution a little bit more?
Well, the privacy and security has changed less than other things. That is to say, our relationship to it has changed less. Frankly, we, from the very beginning, as I've said, depended on ENAC's ability to keep up with the threat environment and to make sure that privacy and security controls were in their accreditation that made it possible for people to feel confident with the health information exchange realm. We've actually taken on responsibilities for the things that relate specifically to our organization's capabilities, like being a health information service provider, the specific requirements that are required for that, as well as for being a certificate authority or a registration authority. Those are the things that we've kind of taken on. So that's been an evolution where ENAC has played a key role in maintaining the focus on these, on the privacy and security for our HISP and CARA programs. Those are our direct trust accreditation programs today, and that's happened over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. But it has certainly in no way reduced the value proposition of having a relationship with ENAC. They've made also an attempt to expand the scope of the kinds of things that they're offering to cover things like, other aspects of privacy and security that are also moving targets. And it's those moving targets that are really hard for direct trust to address. And ENAC, this is their superpower.
One of the things that's important, and I think all of the members know this, the threat vectors in healthcare have increased exponentially. And whether it's ransomware attacks or other types of cyber attacks. And so we have, going back to Scott's point, we continue to stay very involved with new best practices that are out there as far as helping organizations and assisting organizations in their cyber hygiene and assuring they've got the highest possible cyber hygiene within their organizations. Because it's not a matter today of whether or not organizations are going to be attacked. They are. It's a matter of, from our perspective, it's a matter of helping organizations to have the appropriate contingency plans in place so that when they are attacked, that they can recover from that attack very quickly, have minimal impact, whether it's financially or from credibility perspective. That's what's important. So that whole set of, I would say, risk parameters has changed dramatically over the past 3 to 5 years. And I think Scott was talking about that, on how it has evolved. We stay very involved and very in front of all that. In fact, there was a piece of legislation. It's actually the Public Law 116-31 that was signed back in January of this year that actually really put in place that whether or not it's, an ENAC fits into the requirement that they've outlined in that, which is basically that an organization has to use recognized security practices. So in an effort to get a reduced fine, penalty, et cetera, from the Office for Civil Rights. So again, all of those aspects are things that we've done to stay on top.
Sure. And I'm interested in learning a little bit more because I have a background in compliance. And so I very much appreciate the risk and the evolution. And I think we see as we have a more technologically advanced world, like you mentioned, Lee, there's always increased threats. There's always something new. And it's so incredibly important to have a partner who's staying on top of that and someone that you can trust. And I know that that's exactly what ENAC does. And part of that trust is the accreditation programs that you all facilitate, but there are other accreditation and certification programs out there. And so I'm curious, I think one that people hear a lot is High Trust CSF. And I'm wondering if maybe you can describe to the listeners today what the difference might be between the two programs or what someone might consider as they're evaluating the right accreditation program for them.
Yep. So you're right, Catherine. High Trust is a fantastic framework as well, trust framework. And you were talking about CSF, the Common Security Framework, which is really their process for, in fact, administering their program for privacy and security. They have in play. We're fortunate to have an excellent partnership and relationship with High Trust. We're actually an assessor organization for them as well. And their model is, and they are also, as I was talking about that piece of legislation that occurred, they're one of a couple of entities along with ENAC that would be part of and be an organization and a framework that would be part of that. So they have privacy and security. I think the things to think about for organizations is the fact that they have a scoping process. They include NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as part of their cyber, the NIST cyber framework, the General Data Protection Regulations similar to ENAC, a number of aspects. They're on top of new, what I would call best practices that are out there that are being incorporated, as well as other legislation. It's a very comprehensive program that they have. The difference is that organizations go through a scoping process with High Trust to scope what they want included, whether or not they want to include both security and privacy. They just want security. What aspects of their organization they want to do, that's all part of the scoping that High Trust provides as part of their process. And based upon that scoping, organizations then determine how many requirement statements they have, how large is scope they want to review. So it's and the rigor as far as the types of testing, et cetera, are very, very much prescribed as part of that framework as well. And organizations submit all their information into that common security protocol, and then from there it gets submitted, reviewed by the assessor, and then gets submitted to High Trust. It's a very structured process. Our process is within ENAC, it is very similar. But again, in our case, organizations don't go through a scoping process. They have to go through both privacy and security. So there is no scoping. It's the entire organization. And then they go through that process with us. So there are differences, as well as the aspect as well for organizations to be aware of is based upon the scoping is the cost. And so there's a cost aspect as well that organizations need to look at. Finally, it depends upon many organizations, whether it's health plans, provider organizations, will require organizations as part of their risk management process to go through what's called third-party assurance. So as far as third-party assurance, they may require organizations to either be High Trust certified, or they may accept either ENAC or High Trust, depending upon the situation. So again, it depends upon whether or not an organization is requiring an entity to be one or the other. So those are the considerations I think that members need to take into account as they're looking at in evaluating privacy security frameworks. But both meet, the key legislation here of this law that got put in place back in January of this year.
Sure. And Lee, I want to underscore something that you just mentioned because you talked about the situation where an organization might require a high trust certification. And I want to emphasize what you said, that ENAC actually can also act as a high trust assessor, correct?
That's correct. That is correct. And we do. And it goes back to as well, Catherine, good point. The other thing is that we have in the relationship with direct trust, many organizations want to go through first and go through a pre-assessment to determine whether or not they have gaps or other issues before they actually make formal really application to go through a process. So we as well, between Scott and myself and direct trust to the members, if an organization wants to go through and do a pre-assessment with their ENAC or high trust, we can do that with them as well. And then they can also use ENAC as their assessor organization for high trust if they want to go down that route.
Since most of our members have actually been accredited by ENAC for privacy and security over these years, if they're now in a circumstance where they need to consider a high trust assessment, we are actively encouraging our clients, our members, to consider ENAC as a high trust assessor explicitly, because they know these organizations. They've done their ENAC assessments before. So in this way, it can make the whole process more comfortable, even though it is obvious that the high trust effort has a higher. There's a bunch of additional work that's associated there. But doing that with people who already know you and have worked with you in another context makes it a lot easier. So we have explicitly recommended to our members that they consider, if they're going high trust, to consider ENAC as their assessor.
Sure. And I think the overall point that I'm hearing so far in this conversation is that it's critical to have partners that you know and trust, and partners who know what they're doing. And that accreditation is critical for ensuring trust in health information exchange and other capacities too, and to mitigate risk, to mitigate the ever evolving situation with the internet and with threats. So thank you both for sharing more on that. And I'm curious too, just thinking about our situation over the past 2 years currently with the pandemic. Scott, direct trust has stepped in and played a role with public health, in particular, responding to the pandemic and with direct secure messaging. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came about and why direct secure messaging is known and trusted to facilitate that information flow?
Well, it's really interesting that you say it the way you did. I mean, I would love to take credit as direct trust for this event, but this was actually an organic response that the market had to a new requirement. So suddenly, at the beginning of this whole pandemic mess, there was a need to communicate a whole lot of information to public health, and public health technology deployments are pretty well, they're widely variable, but they're also generally not very they're not very up to date. So being able to communicate with public health requires a pretty you have to be able to handle a pretty simple approach to how the communication takes place. And direct secure messaging was just sitting there ready to be used. And frankly, the other thing that happened that was kind of happening right at the same time is that there was an organization called the APHL, the Association of Public Health Laboratories, and they were offering a capability of routing secure messages that they received to other locations that needed to have the same data. So, for instance, you had an obligation to communicate to multiple jurisdictions. You need to be able to send to the place where the patient resided, but also to the provider's home state. And frequently those are two different places. So APHL was taking that kind of routing responsibility on, but getting the information to APHL was done as an effort associated with what they called the EICR program, or ECR, which was the initial case reporting exercise that went through to APHL. That the traffic that went through there was just extraordinary, and the response of the industry was very rapid, basically going from 0 to 60 in about 3 months. Basically, over the course of less than a half a year, thousands of sources of this data made it possible for them to send it via direct to APHL or to other directly to health departments across the country. So that was really an organic exercise. It was really just born out of the simplicity that direct secure messaging represents, and its ubiquitous deployment already in the healthcare, in the EHR space. So that was really an exciting thing to see, and we are excited for its ongoing growth, because obviously pandemic is a special case, but there are lots of initial cases of lots of different conditions. So you don't need to think about this as something that only works for COVID. It actually has paved those streets for communication about basically any infectious disease, which is a huge benefit to the industry.
Sure. And Lee, I have a follow-up question for you. So a lot of our conversation today has been about the longevity and the relationship between ENAC and Direct Trust. And so I'm curious, you know Direct Trust, but I would say as an outsider kind of watching this unfold with the pandemic, can you describe any of your thoughts watching this unfold, or how you believe the relationship between trust played into the ability to see more information flow expeditiously as a result of the pandemic?
Well, I think, first of all, I think Scott was talking about all of the public health aspect here, which has been extremely important. We've had to adjust as well as an organization, and we were doing, prior to the pandemic, we were doing all of our reviews of organizations, their data centers and other, on site. And so we've had to go virtual with all of that too. But I do think that as Scott is talking about the whole trust aspect, I believe that the whole trust capability here, whether or not it's telehealth, because we've seen telehealth become a very significant technology as well used during the pandemic, to data exchange. And whether or not, I think we're seeing a lot more data exchange, a lot larger amounts of data exchanged. And so, Catherine, this goes back to the point where we've been talking about is the whole aspect of risk with all of this additional data exchange that's occurring. So the need to assure the level of trust, especially around patient data that's being exchanged, whether or not it's public health, whether or not it's de-identified data, however it is, we're trying to be and continue to focus on the whole aspects of that data exchange and trusting those various risk vectors as that's happening. So I would tell you that it has exponentially increased. It's going to continue to exponentially increase, especially as we start to implement interoperability here, more so. We've been doing that for a number of years, but we start to now, we've got EHR data, we're looking at the Trusted Exchange Framework with Common Agreement, TEFCA, at 21st Century. All of this is now continuing to move forward, and we're going to have more data exchange. So we're all about, that's great, and we are promoters of it. We just want to look to help all the organizations, including all the members of Direct Trust, manage that risk and manage that data flow and minimize the potential risk. And when and if an attack occurs, how quickly they can look to address that contingency. And that's what we're focused on as far as the whole issue on the pandemic. Certainly the pandemic has raised the bar on data exchange.
Sure. And Lee, you just rattled off a whole bunch of acronyms, and I want to ask you about a couple more. So, you've recently made headlines with the TD-RAP program, the Trusted Dynamic Registration and Authentication Accreditation, TD-RAP, and that's been developed in conjunction with UDAP.org. And I'm interested if you can tell us a little bit more about how that relates to the ONC's Cures Act and then also CMS's interoperability and patient access rules.
So great question, and you did a great job of that acronym. And so TD-RAP, yes, we've tried to bring, and we all want to get at least 20 new acronyms out of every one of these sessions. And between Scott and I, we're hoping that all the members or anybody that views this is getting at least 20 new acronyms. But in any event, what we've done with this TD-RAP program, and we also have another one called Trusted Network Accreditation Program in partnership with HITRUST. We've focused on the whole interoperability side of this. So you were asking, how does this relate to 21st century cures, the CMS rules? Everything that we've done and that we are doing with these programs relates back and aligns with those regulations. Our intent is to try to help organizations, again, raising the bar and the whole aspect of focusing on trust. So the TD-RAP component of this really aligns with all the work that's going on with the Fire at Scale Task Force, or the FAST initiative, which is under ONC, and is as well, in fact, the latest news earlier this week is that the whole FAST initiative is now going to be migrating under the HL7 as an HL7 accelerator in the beginning of 2022. So that's all great news. What we've done, all these FHIR APIs that are out there and what's going on with Da Vinci, as far as use cases that they've developed, we have developed this program for the testing of FHIR APIs utilizing the Unified Data Access Profiles, UDAP. And we wanted to raise the bar, one, on privacy and security of these APIs, and as well as we wanted to be able to create a glide path for the industry, Catherine, that goes from organizations that might be using just OAuth 2 today as part of their testing to moving it to the UDAP profiles. And both FAST and ONC and all the rules as well are focused on migrating towards UDAP. The reason why is UDAP from OAuth 2 provides for a far more dynamic, scalable ability for all these FHIR APIs to be promulgated. Under the OAuth, it really does not provide that level of scalability and dynamic registration and authentication. So that's why we've created this program. And it aligns with all of the various, again, regulations that are out there. And then we did the same thing for this Trusted Network Accreditation Program with HITRUST. As TEFCA moves forward and is now moving forward and at lightning speed, there's now a roadmap on how this is going to play out, with the intent of getting the common agreement by the recognized coordinating entity Sequoia done by the end of the year. And then these Qualified Health Information Networks, another acronym here, QHINs, in 2022 to be implemented and promulgated to create this data exchange network, where we've created this TNAP initiative that aligns with the TEFCA regulation. HITRUST provides the privacy and security. So now we can raise the bar as well for all of these entities that are going to be exchanging data. And the latest document that just came out from the Sequoia project is the RCE on the Common Agreement data elements that they're looking at including, looks at and basically says, hey, we're going to put language in here to require these QHINs to go through this type of privacy and security and accreditation or certification program. So that's About the shortest answer I can give you to how we align, what we're trying to do. But again, it goes back to raising the bar and the TD wrap to create a complete glide path for organizations, whether or not they've got one fire API that they're looking to validate, all the way up to an entity that's using a health plan that might be using many fire APIs and using it in portals, and looking to having fire servers as well to be accredited. So that's the extent that we're looking at here.
Charlie, and so it sounds like you've talked about a lot of different puzzle pieces and kind of how they fit together to form the bigger picture. And Scott, I'm curious, from your perspective, does direct trust add any additional puzzle pieces, or how does direct trust fit into what Lee just described?
Well, it's interesting you should ask. So that explicitly around the UDAP aspect of this. So Lee described this value proposition around the trusted dynamic registration process, which is basically, the problem is that the data holders have all these potential apps that might connect to them. And then the question is, how do those apps get trusted by the data source? And so with dozens of apps that need to make connections to hundreds of endpoints, how do all those connections get made without it having to do individual orchestration of that effort? So the trusted dynamic registration exercise is a technical capability, but also is supported by the accreditation effort, that the TD Rapid accreditation effort that is a testing of that capability. But underneath the covers, what is required to make UDAP work and to make the fire ecosystem scale is trust and identity for organizations, which is to say, who's calling, whose identity is this anyway, and who am I connected to? Each of these parties need to be reliably identified, and then the way in which they're reliably identified on the internet today, and will continue to be the case, is with a digital certificate. And so the digital certificates that are a part of the ecosystem already, if they come from a trust framework that allows for them all to be able to communicate with each other reliably and to know who's talking to whom, that is the role that direct trust looks to play and believes we will play in this new ecosystem. Now, the current state of the TEFCA QN technical framework has nothing to do with fire. Just to be clear, it is absolutely not there yet. But I think everyone expects in the long run that these sort of these intermediary-less connections, which are fire client to fire server, need to have a mechanism to ensure that you know who you're talking to. And that's the core capability that direct trust brings to direct secure messaging, and it is the same core capability we believe we can bring to the fire ecosystem, which is, and we may not be the only trust framework that supports that. In fact, we've recently brought in the assets of another trust framework, Safe Identity, that was also in conversations with the Karen Alliance, specifically trying to figure out how trust frameworks could trust each other's credentials so that this broader ecosystem could actually function. And that is, in fact, how we think this will work. So we believe we've got a key role to play here, and so we're looking to continue this deep relationship we've had with ENAC and extend that so that our members will understand that their role as it relates to this new fire ecosystem is also supported by an accreditation program from ENAC.
Sure, thank you, Scott. And a big takeaway from this conversation for me is that while the regulatory environment is changing, while technology is advancing, while there's new threats, it seems like the partnership between Direct Trust and ENAC, as well as the individual organizations, are on solid footing and absolutely looking out for their members and clients as we look towards the future and make sure that everyone's prepared to continue advancing interoperability and ensure that there's a safe health IT ecosystem. And so On that note, I'm curious, Scott, any final thoughts or words of wisdom, advice for the listeners today?
Well, I mean, I think the basic thing I think people need to understand is that independent certification of capabilities is a key element of how we kind of make sure things will work. As I was saying earlier, it's great that people are good at what they do, but who says they're good at what they do? And that's what makes people trust, is to hear from an independent source that this organization understands their obligations and they are trustworthy as a result. So I mean, I think it's as a key underpinning of trust. I mean, trust and identity is a key element, but independent certification is another.
Lee, your thoughts?
So, first of all, this was terrific. Catherine, great job in facilitating as well. And I thank you for the opportunity. What I wanted to say relates to the members and those that would look at this is that the relationship that we've had, the long-term relationship we've had with Direct Trust, we have really appreciated that partnership. We look forward to a continued long partnership as we both have very similar objectives and really focus on the whole trust side of it. And I think that Direct Trust, all of its members, all the work groups, everything that they're doing, it is all about that. We're focusing, as Scott said, as being kind of that independent entity, focusing on the privacy, the security, and providing the level of trust I think that organizations are looking for, and to provide that level of appropriate cyber hygiene for organizations. So we look forward to continuing to work with Scott, with Direct Trust, with Karen, all of these entities as we look to kind of move interoperability forward and look to increase trust throughout the entire ecosystem.
Well, Lee, Scott, this has been a tremendously insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And to learn more about ENAC, visit enac.org. To learn more about Direct Trust, visit directtrust.org. Thank you.